Warnings again today that Europe's wounded economy threatens an already weak global recovery. The International Monetary Fund's latest report says if there's no urgent action, the world could be plunged into another recession. Australia, it seems, remains better insulated than most developed economies, because it feeds China's hunger for raw materials. But can that last? Brendan Trembath reports.
The worries of the world weigh on the shoulders of the top forecasters at the International Monetary Fund.
The world recovery, which was weak in the first place, is in danger of stalling. The epicenter of the danger is Europe, but the rest of the world is increasingly affected.
But it could be worse.
There is an even greater danger, namely that the European crisis intensifies. In this case, the world could be plunged into another recession.
It's not what investors want to hear. Stocks fell in Europe and the United States. Bad news travels fast in financial markets. Not only did the International Monetary Fund cut its forecast for global growth to 3.3% from 4%, in a statement, the Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, called for immediate action to restore confidence. Otherwise, she said, we could easily slide into a 1930s moment. But not everyone is this gloomy.
I'd be very surprised that the forebodings with regard to the IMF with regard to financial markets are likely to come to pass.
The chief economist at Westpac says it's now significantly easier for European countries to borrow their way out of trouble.
Bond rates are coming down in the troubled nations such as Italy and Spain, and the ECB is taking a much more aggressive approach through their bank lending programs.
Bill Evans does not expect Europe's woes will have much of an impact on China, even though they are major trading partners. He's relatively optimistic about China's fortunes in this year of the dragon.
China is basically relying upon the domestic economy for its growth. That's investment, particularly in residential housing and in infrastructure.
There's a major move to the cities. Early this year, China's government announced that for the first time, more people live in the cities than in the countryside. There are growing pains, though.
Environmental pollution is another big concern. And then underlying the pollution issue is scarcity of water. The North China Plain is drying up, and that is quite a critical stage now.
It says Chinese authorities are trying to do something about it.
By now, the Chinese are actually quite careful and to put that into planning. Whether it works or not is another issue. But it's one of the big priorities. Like, for example, we have the city of Chengdu coming to Sydney for Chinese New Year. In their planning, greening and green environment is a very big priority.
Just over 50% of the people in China are now city dwellers. The HSBC economist Paul Bloxham says in the developed world the figure is about 70%. So he says China's economy has more room to grow.
Well, we think that it's still in pretty good shape. They are still emerging. They have a significant amount of growth that's yet to come in order to lift their middle class, build their middle class and lift the economy up. Their GDP per capita is still at a very low level when you compare it to the rest of the developed world.
And of course, continuing growth in China rubs off on Australia.
Well, the thing Australia's got going for it at the moment is it still has a baked-in mining investment boom that's playing out. Those projects are huge and fairly unstoppable. That's going to be a key driver of GDP growth this year.
We think Australia's growth rate this year will be around 3%. That compares with 2% last year. It'll be in two halves. The first half, I think, will be closer to that 2.5% pace. But the second half, I think, will be more like 3.5%. And that, of course, will be reflecting partly that profile with regard to China, with China being slower in the first half, more rapid in the second half.
Australia is uniquely placed to deal with the stresses and strains in the global economy that are reported by the IMF today.
China is still hungry for Australia's raw materials such as coal, copper and iron ore, though there's increasing debate about how sustainable the trade is.
And it's not so much that Australia is running out of resources, but Australia is running out of infrastructure. Australia is in very big need of infrastructure funding, and that cannot really be covered by domestic sources or the available international sources. So that will bring with it a closer cooperation also in the financial sector.
So when you talk about infrastructure in Australia, what sort of infrastructure is lacking?
These would be, for new coal mines, for example, would be anything from railway lines to port facilities to electricity. So general infrastructure.
For now, both Australia and China continue to prosper. They're expected to achieve respectable economic growth rates this year. Europe's instability is still a worry, though, and even the optimists can't be too confident.
Brendan Trembath reporting there.